You're watching Promethean Actions weekly class for September 6th, 2025 with Brian Lantz. Build, baby, build. The momentum of the Trump administration. And as I've been saying, you won't read about this in mainstream media. You have to come here. And here's Brian.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, build, baby, build. That's what's happening. And I just want to start with a title from a Wall Street Journal article, wringing their hands. Constantly in motion. Trump's cabinet portrays a White House that's always winning. And if you know anything about the Wall Street Journal, you know they hate Trump's guts. And that's what's happening. He's winning. There's on the other side, as everybody I think is aware, there's the nag of storylines. Oh, the labor force isn't growing. Oh, this, oh, that. And then, of course, there's the legal battles. But Trump keeps coming. He keeps coming at the enemy of the nation, not just the deep state, but the central banking system, the Wall Street, City of London crowd, etc. He keeps coming at them, and from every angle, and it's just relentless. He and his team, and it's an expanded team into the private sector. I'll touch on that some. I think it's really important that people understand uncertainty. Uncertainty. This is, uncertainty about the markets, uncertainty about investment. This is noise. It's simply noise. And yes, there's a war going on. There is smoke and noise. There's smoke and mirrors, all around. So let's cut through the noise. Let's start with some essentials. And I want to just start with the first slide. This is just my Substack page. It's free to subscribe to, or you can just go there and use the material. It's in depth on these issues that I can only touch on briefly here tonight, and we'll move quickly through it. Move to the next slide, if you will. The theme here is momentum.
Here's your Substack.
Yes, thank you. That's Brian Lantz .substack.com, and you see there's an article there on big turbines. When will we have shovels in the ground was a question I got. And well, this is a response, a fulsome response, but there's a background on everything. And then next, my book, my latest book, out before the election results were known on Amazon on Election Day, Rebuild the USA, the Trump Presidency and Beyond. That's 450 pages in depth, sector by sector in terms of the U.S. economy. So with that, let's move to steel. And I want to put up a quote here. The quote you have, Tony.
Right.
I'll just go ahead and start reading from it while you have a chance to get it up.
Okay.
From the top, this is from The American Machinist. August 24th, The American Machinist, and the reporting on data from the World Steel Association. And there you have it in front of you as well. Steel production has declined worldwide in each of the past 3 years due to slow industrial and construction activity. And then you skip to the last paragraph. The emerging trend in global steel production is a steady rise in U.S. output, now at 47.4 million metric tons for the year, up 1.5% over the 2024 figure. Despite the same weak demand from industrial and construction sectors at work in the rest of the world. And then it says in July, historically, a slow period for steel output, U.S. producers output totaled 7.1 million metric tons, which is 2.8% higher than their June output and 4.8% above July 2024. That is 5% higher. So U.S. steel production from all companies, Cleveland Clips, U.S. Steel, and so forth, that steel production is expanding, as we're sitting here tonight. And so that's a first measurement. And then if you look at auto, I'll just mention it briefly, because it's tied so closely. Ford Motor Company, they're up 8,000 cars this year. They're adding 4,000 workers to their workforce. Ford is going build American, and they're leading the way. But other companies like Toyota and Hyundai and so forth are expanding as well in the United States, production in the United States of automobiles. The U.S. auto sector is being reworked. Then we turn, and you can put up the next slide. You turn to aluminum. Well, Century Aluminum, I'm using again an example here. Century Aluminum is restarting, bringing back up to full capacity its Mount Holly, South Carolina plant. This plant, just this expansion, it's been operating, but now it's going to move to full production. That plant will produce 10% of all the aluminum produced in the United States. That's the slide. That's the report on Century Aluminum. $50 million investment. And they're attributing this directly, Jesse Green, who's the CEO of Century Aluminum, directly to the tariff policies on steel and aluminum that were implemented by the Trump administration. And they emphasize the average job at Century Aluminum is $100,000 a year. All right. So this is not small potatoes. It's almost $1 billion to the South Carolina economy. And as well, Century Aluminum wants to open up a second plant. The site is not determined yet, but they want to open it up by 2026. And that plant, whether it's 2026, 2027, you have to see how these things go. But that second plant would double U.S. aluminum production. We're climbing out of a deep, deep hole, but we're coming back in terms of basic steel, aluminum production, and the rest. And steel, of course, you'll recall the Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel partnership that was announced back in July. So that's just for starters. So let's talk about machinery. Here, you can take that slide down, Tony. Let's talk about machinery as another, let me first emphasize labor. Trump went to Pennsylvania, went to the Pittsburgh area to announce the U.S. Steel Nippon partnership for the build out of rebuilding of U.S. steel on American soil. The next slide is an example of the highlighting of the role of labor, which is also being brought dramatically forward, rightfully, in terms of the 250th anniversary of the United States, the founding of the United States. Here you have a poster. It's one of the posters put out by the U.S. Labor Department, right? And it's steel, right? It's steel girders. This is what U.S. labor is about. It's about building the things, the essential stuff. You know what Jim Farley of Ford Motor Company calls essential production, essential work. This is what is now being brought forward in the new Republican Party and by the Trump administration, and it's critical, of course. A skilled workforce, a productive workforce is what's critical to our future. But from there, let's move on to machinery very briefly. Here's the headline. This is from the Association of Manufacturing Technology. That may seem like a kind of strange name, but that's machine tools. That's the Association of Machine Tool Builders, Machine Tool Users. It's one of their organizations. Internet of Things, software, everything that's combined. That's why they call it now the Association of Manufacturing Technology. It's more than just machine tools themselves. And here's their title of their article. This is from August 11th. Machinery orders rise as automation grows. Aerospace soars in terms of new demand. They're talking about new demand being booked for machine tools and machinery generally. They're talking here about machinery as a whole. And so you had a 9.1% increase, they report, in May, a 7.7% increase in June of 2024. And that's an increase of 13.7% for the first 6 months of 2025 over 2024. A 13.7% increase in machinery production. Contract machine shops. These are the largest consumers of manufacturing technology. Contract machine shops. These are the people that do specialized production. They need the best equipment and so forth. Their orders are up 12% in the first half of 2025. Orders of engines, turbines, and other power transmission equipment is up 19%. Primary metal manufacturers have increased their orders by 50%. That's primary metal manufacturers have increased their orders by 50% for machinery. This, of course, is aided by the legislation that's been passed, what's been called the One Big Beautiful Bill, the legislation that allows 100% expensing in the first year, writing off these investments, at least in part in the form of tax deductions, up to 100% of the taxes. And so this is proceeding. Then on machine tools themselves, machine tools is what builds machines. These are the essential building blocks of a modern industrial economy. New orders, January through June 2025, up 21.2%. And the value of the individual orders is what's really increasing. But that gives you a quick sense on that front. So steel, aluminum, auto, I mentioned briefly. Then machinery overall, machinery orders, new orders, and machine tools specifically. And then we look at non-residential construction. I mean, everybody knows what's going on in housing. It's a mess. And interest rates have got to be brought down. Other measures have to be taken. We've discussed that in the past. I discuss it in my book. It's on the Substack in terms of updates. But so setting aside residential housing, which is still got to be solved. And you may have heard that Treasury Secretary Bessent, in a recent interview, floated the trial balloon that in the fall, the White House, the Trump administration, is going to announce a housing emergency to address more fully this question of residential housing. And of course, they're beating up on the Fed in terms of getting interest rates down. But let's stop and look at non-residential construction, heavy construction. That's bridges, that's highways, that's factories, and so forth. Well, in the first half of 2025, this is from Construct Connect. It's a big clearinghouse for new contracts and bidding. They report that non-residential building starts are up 11.5% over last year, the first half of last year. With manufacturing starts, new manufacturing facilities up 77%.
My gosh.
77%. 2025 heavy civilian engineering. Here's some figures. Airports up 51.4%. Roads and highways up just 2%. But Sean Duffy and the Department of Transportation are clearing a log jam of already placed orders, but had never gotten out of the, get out of the bureaucratic EPA, et cetera, channels. And so those starts were starts on paper, but now those are going forward. So the 2% figure actually understates it. But then bridges, that's more straightforward. Bridges up 29.5%. Dams and marine, think of waterwork, major river works and so forth. Levees, dams, and the rest up 37.5% from a year ago. Electrical power infrastructure up 43.6%. And of course, wind and solar investment is virtually disappearing. So those are quickly, that's quickly a picture. Now, I want to come to manufacturing here, and that's the next slide, Tony. I want to come to next. Come to manufacturing in its totality. We talked about machinery, machine tools, construction, but U.S. manufacturing, that's a key sector. In addition to construction, energy, and so on and so forth, U.S. manufacturing. President Trump is committed to returning the United States to the status of a manufacturing superpower. All right, here's a headline. You probably saw it. You may not have really thought about it, but it probably nagged you if you saw it or heard about it. Manufacturing contracts for 6th consecutive month in August. Okay, was promulgated by Industry Week and others, and it came from the Institute for Supply Management. And they showed manufacturing PMI. That's the Purchasers Managers Index. That is, they survey purchase managers who are buying for manufacturing, and they showed 48.7%. That's not up 47.8%. 50% is break even. 48.7 is below it. And according to the Institute for Supply Management, for the entire year up until now, manufacturing has been contracting 6 consecutive months, according to their figures from the their survey of the purchase managers. But that was the headline all over the country, at least in the financial press and those that follow, try to follow or at least have an ear out for what's going on in sectors of the U.S. economy. That's from the Institute of Supply Management. There's another outfit. You probably heard of them, Standard & Poor's. They also produce a Purchase Managers Index. And while I've been talking, you might have been, those of you that are on Zoom here as opposed to on with your phone, you may have already been reading it. Here's the Standard & Poor's U.S. Manufacturing PMI report, saying it stood at 53 in August. That's 3 above break even. It's increasing in August, slightly down from the preliminary estimate of 53.3%, but up from 49.8% in July. The reading signals the strongest improvement in operating conditions since May of 2022. Production rose at the fastest pace in more than 3 years, while new orders increased for the 8th straight month. All right, new orders increased across manufacturing for the 8th straight month. So that's going back to December. That's the aftermath of the actual elections, when companies started realizing what was actually going on. There was going to be a sea change in the direction of the country. All right. So, okay, well, what's the difference here? Why is one set of figures? You can take that down if you want, Tony. But what's the difference here between, I'm not saying Standard & Poor's is the cat's meow, but what's the difference between Standard & Poor's and the producers management or the Institute for Supply Management figures. What's the difference? They're both supposedly surveying purchase managers, in terms of, hey, these are the guys with their ears to the ground. All right. Well, the difference is Standard & Poor's interviews twice as many companies as the Institute of Supply Management. Further, the Institute for Supply Management primarily focuses on the Fortune 100 companies, the top bracket of companies who actually have, Fortune 100, 200, whatever. They have executives, with their own office. Maybe it's in the C-suite or somewhere else. They have their own office. They've got a plaque on their door and so on and so forth. That's who the Institute for Supply Management calls up. Standard & Poor's surveys small and medium companies, far more of them. In addition, further, they talk to people that are not purchasing managers, because think about it. Lots of small and medium-sized companies don't have a purchasing manager as an executive. It might be some guy out in the warehouse. It might be somebody, that's wearing three hats. So the difference is that the Standard & Poor's is actually measuring a broader status of the U.S. economy, and the smaller and medium-sized companies that make up the core of the U.S. economy. And so in addition to that quote, let me read from you. The Standard & Poor's Global U.S. Manufacturing PMI was over 50, indicating expansion for January through August of 2025. It was expanding the entire year. The specific readings were January 50.9, February 51.2, March 52.7. You get the idea, right? Just July was 49.8, and then it bounced back up in August. So U.S. manufacturing, based on the Standard & Poor's survey of a much broader cross-section of purchasing managers, CEOs, who they talk to in terms of small and medium-sized companies and so forth, shows continued expansion of U.S. manufacturing. And I think that just goes to show, in a certain sense, how you gotta dig through and see where these figures are actually coming from. Look, we again, to speak to the question of labor, U.S. labor. It's also announced, by, I'll come back to it a little later, but look, the employment of native-born Americans has expanded by an approximately 2 million people, 2 million employees since the beginning of the year. Whether it's exactly that amount, more than that, less than amount, it's the order of magnitude of what's going on. And we have a shrinking of non-authorized, as they officially call it, employment, i.e. probably a significant drop-off of employment in illegals who are no longer in the workforce. So this question of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Trump is absolutely right to take this on, the manipulation of figures that's been going on these matters. Again, that's not to say Standard & Poor's is perfect, but you get the drift. We're in an expansion mode in terms of the U.S. economy, and there's a lot more coming down the pipe. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, you might know it, back in February, we talked about it here. Back in February, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had presented between 600 and 700 projects that under the Trump administration could be rapidly advanced, major infrastructure projects, wetlands, dredging for harbors, you name it. U.S. Army Corps authorized projects brought forward and said these contracts could move forward now. Just to be clear, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doesn't build stuff. They oversee contractors building stuff. in conjunction with local governments and so forth. I'm speaking about here in the United States, in the 50 states and territories added. Not what they're doing in the other side of the world. They are part of the U.S. Army. All right. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had 600 to 700 projects. Well, they got sued. They got sued by the immediately when these figures were released. They got sued by something called the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a Malthusian outfit. $20 million a year, staff, lawyers operating pro bono, and so forth. And so the Army Corps pulled in their horns. But now that's moving forward because of the changes in the laws coming down through Lee Zeldin from the EPA and otherwise. We're now clearing the way for dredging, whether it's the Quileute River in Washington State for dredging, which began in September 1st, 2025, just a few days ago. Keystone Harbor in Oklahoma, the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Islands project in Maryland. Port of Houston is pleased that the president's fiscal year 2026 budget has allocated $161 million for the Houston Ship Canal expansion, and so on and so forth. So the reinterpretation, if you will, of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899 back to something sane is underway, and I'll just here's the order from the U.S. Army to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It says, consistent with applicable law, prioritize efficiency and certainty over all other objectives, including those of activist groups that do not align with the policy goals set forth in Section 2 of, and it's referencing Executive Order 14154, Unleash America's Affordable and Reliable Energy, the President's Executive Order. And address, it says, 2 of that order, or that could otherwise add delays or ambiguity to the permitting process, and to address the pathologies of the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, the pathologies of NEPA, the NEPA process, and NEPA litigation as identified by the U.S. Supreme Court. That's from the U.S. Army to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is how we're gonna run things, right? Commensurate with the law, with the U.S. Supreme Court decisions. So this is now the fight goes on, but the fight over Resolution Copper Mine, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that's hung up in the court, but that's going to be solved probably in the next month or so, resolved finally. That's in Arizona. That will be a major, substantial increase in U.S. domestic copper production, and so on and so forth. But obviously, the war with the Malthusian environmentalists, finance out of Wall Street, the City of London, etc., continues, but it's being cleared. So from there, I want to go, and I'm trying to move quickly here. I hope this is useful for everybody, on this broadcast, and those that will watch it later. I want to turn to another agreement reached, very important, just over a week ago, between the U.S. and South Korea. We talked 2 weeks ago about U.S. shipping and South Korea's investment of $50 billion, upcoming, but already started. $50 billion in investments from South Korean companies in conjunction with the government into U.S. shipbuilding to revive major U.S. shipbuilding at scale with the most modern advanced technology, with South Korean shipbuilding along with Japan and China have today. That's being brought back to the United States. And this is going to be U.S. jobs. This is U.S. workers being upskilled. And so we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Well, just on the 25th of August. The U.S. and South Korea, you may recall this. President Lee, met with President Trump at the U.S. White House, and simultaneous, or almost simultaneous, a round table, and you can go to the next slide, Tony. A round table event occurred. The Business Roundtable Chorus, Korea standing for Korea, the U.S., met at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. And they signed, there was some 11 memorandum of understanding signed. There were 17 major South Korean companies represented there. And, a similar cross-section in the United States. 4 of those agreements, kind of represented here in this photograph, 4 of those agreements are on nuclear energy. And you see Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on the right-hand side in this picture here. So this is a photograph from that event. All right. You see the event is subtitled Partnership for a Manufacturing Renaissance. All right. Now this is only the start. What I'm going to outline here is just the start, because there's more that's going to come out of this partnership. Because right now, Korean companies, the so-called chaebols, the conglomerates, major capital-intensive industrial companies, along with utilities, are in the midst of a negotiating process, which involves Korean hydro and nuclear power with Westinghouse Company, our major nuclear production company here in the United States. And they're in the process of forming a partnership. That's what's in the works. We'll see how that unfolds, but it seems that's going to come to fruition very quickly. But what was signed in terms of memorandum of understanding at the Business Roundtable on August 25th was that KHNP, that's Korean Hydro and Nuclear Power, that's that produces 30% of the power in South Korea itself. Just example, they're involved in building nuclear power plants abroad, including in the Middle East and so forth. All right, but KHNP and Samsung, you know that name, Samsung C&T Corp, that's their construction company, have agreed to participate in Fermi America's massive AI hypergrid project in Texas. That's the next slide. Doosan Interbility, another big company, also signed a separate memorandum of understanding with Fermi America for cooperation on their nuclear and small modular reactor projects. Fermi America in Amarillo, Texas, up there in the Panhandle area of Texas, North Texas. Otherwise, you can talk about it as part of West Texas, but it's the Panhandle region, Lubbock, Amarillo, that area. Fermi America, which was launched by former U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, along with other business partners with obviously significant financing that's coming on board, is launching a project which will involve 11 gigawatts of power. They've filed the initial paperwork, the COLA filing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for 4 nuclear power plants. Those will be Westinghouse AP1000 nuclear power plants. There was talk about as many as 10, but there's 4 in this filing. And additional, they'll use natural gas. They've already signed agreements for turbines for the project, for combustion turbines for the combined cycle gas plants, and we'll also use solar arrays and small modular reactors to produce a total of 11 gigawatts of power behind the meter. That is, they're not going to be taking the power from the grid. They're going to be building this as a dedicated energy source for a massive data center, AI data center complex. It's being built on 5,000 acres of land. And very significantly, it's going in next to Pantex. Pantex is the United States' primary weapons disassembly and assembly center, weapons center of nuclear weapons in the United States for both assembly and disassembly. It's going in right next door, not accidentally. It's in conjunction with the Texas Tech University, major research university, which is leasing the land to Fermi America. So this is a very important project. Whatever pans out in terms of AI, in terms of its applications and practicality over the coming year or two, the point is here we have a massive build out in power. Additionally, in terms of the memorandums of understanding, Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power and Doosan Interability signed an agreement with X Energy, which is building small modular reactors, the XE100. And they're committed to building out 3 gigawatts of XE100 power by 2032. That's small modular reactors, don't add up to a gigawatt. They may be 300 megawatts. So that's roughly 3 or 4 to a gigawatt. So they're talking about building roughly 10 to 12 small modular reactors, C100 reactors in the course of the coming years. Now, just to grasp this again, just to underscore this, Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power, Doosan Interability, these are massive production outfits. South Korea produces a nuclear power plant in 56 months, less than 5 years. Count them up, 56 months. That's how fast they can produce them by standardization. And their standardized nuclear reactors in South Korea that they built are based on the AP1000s. They licensed Westinghouse to build their own version of the AP1000s. There were some legal disputes, but those have now been ironed out. They do it through modular production, block production of components in a factory type situation. And if you're building out 4 nuclear reactors in one location, like with Fermi America, well, that becomes a model for doing the same thing elsewhere, as with this developing, already openly discussed in the financial press, partnership that's in the works between KHNP and Westinghouse itself. So what we have here, besides this very big play in terms of, that's an oil patch term, big play, besides the very big play of Fermi America, what you have here is a consolidation of a U.S.-South Korean combination that will bring, South Korean production capability, physical construction, production capability, of components, heavy forgings, turbines. Doosan produces turbines as well. You can move on to the next slide. Here's a picture of the Doosan plant. Basically their largest plant in South Korea. And you can move on to the next. They're also in the business of producing turbines, and move on to the next slide. Yes, they produce the heavy forgings. This is just an example of a forging being made of a component for a small modular reactor. They produce them in that factory setting. So this is what is is in the works to be brought to the United States of America in a partnership. This is part of the, if you recall, I believe the figure is $350 billion. It's either 300 billion or 350 billion dollar agreement, tariff package, right? As part of a reduced tariff on South Korean goods. South Korea is committing over $300 billion into the U.S., 50 billion of that into shipping, and so on and so forth. And just to mention it, there was also the consolidation of the agreement with Japan to invest 500 billion into what Howard Lutnick calls the National Security Fund by South Korea and Japan. 500 billion now coming from Japan, and the president issued an executive order with details on that package of tariff reductions, commitments from Japan, and so on and so forth. So this is what we're going through here right now in terms of nuclear power or in terms of shipping. It's just part of this investment climate. So moving on to just bring up the next slide. I want to just shift back to labor. If you go to LaRouche PAC or LaRouche Promethean PAC, if you go to Promethean PAC, PAC, Political Action Committee, you can get these half pagers that announce Main Street, not Wall Street. A new Republican Party is rising. And on the back, the basics of the new and old Republican Party. The new Republican Party of tariffs, economic nationalism, government as a builder, as a participant, protecting Social Security and Medicare, one income supporting a family, peace through strength. And of course, we know the old GOP wing of Mitch McConnell and Jeb Bush and George Bush Sr. and the rest of that crowd. Get these, download it to print it out, order a stack for distribution. Now is the time to rally for the 2026 elections. But if that next slide, Trump emphasized this in his campaigning. Tariffs, yes, absolutely. In conjunction with that, the point was affordability, to bring the costs down and to raise the wages up. This was to celebrate, and he's framed this now in terms of the 250th anniversary. Here's a quote from U.S. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez de Rimmer. That's our U.S. Labor Secretary on the July jobs report. Wages, I'm just going to highlight a couple items here. Wages continue to rise, and native-born workers have accounted for all job gains since Inauguration Day. And continuing, whether it's expanding access to on-the-job training programs or cutting red tape for employers, the Department of Labor remains laser-focused on amplifying economic growth to ensure every American has a pathway to a good-paying job and a secure retirement. And this underscores, just emphasized in the next item, which is from the 2024 campaign. End inflation, make America affordable again. Raising up the wage levels, the skill levels, the productivity of the economy, the producer economy brought to the fore, which allows wages to rise. And just the final, I just want to conclude with honest aim here. Labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration. That was from his first annual message to the U.S. Congress in 1861. And that's what we're building today a producer economy of labor, entrepreneurs, of real production. We're moving Earth, and we're only a little more than 7 months into President Trump's second term. So I'll conclude there. We got more
Tremendous.
mountains to move.
Tremendous. That's a tremendous picture, which people, from mainstream media, and even, I mean, you can even hunt around on X and you don't have a picture of this because it's hidden, it's buried, and Brian has laid it out. So it's just this is an amazing thing, and people should spread this around.